All right. All right, let's get into it. So, without further ado, I want to bring on our guest for today. This is Eddie from Midwestern Marks. Again, you guys, if you don't know Midwestern Marks, I don't know if you've been like sleeping under a rock or something, but go subscribe, go follow, go check out their website, their TikTok, Instagram, everything. I follow them everywhere. And really, really great resource for everything Marxism, anti-imperialism. I have their YouTube channel linked on our YouTube live chat in the pinned comment, so you can go subscribe easily from right there. And then I will spam the chat right now with their website. But hey, Radical Leftist Agenda, thank you for resubscribing. I appreciate that. Tier 3, OG, I love that. Thank you so much. So I'm going to spam their website right now. Go check that out as well. But I do want to say, before I bring Eddie on, I want to say thank you to Midwestern Marks, because they were some of the few people who were standing in solidarity with us and with everyone else when this whole patriotism debate was really, really getting a lot of traction and fire, and a lot of strong opinions were being had. Yifan, thank you for the super chat. I appreciate that. So, it takes a lot of guts to do that. Uncanny, thank you for subscribing. It takes a lot of guts to do that. And, they're stand true to their values and what they believe in. And we need more of that here in our Marxist-Leninist space. So, without further ado, I want to bring on the man himself. Welcome to the show. How you doing?
Good. Thank you for that introduction. You're too kind.
Nah, I mean, you deserve it. You deserve it. So, you're quite young, like me. Everyone here, because they're my audience, they know how I got into like the current political space I'm in and how I arrived at my ideology. But I'm curious. It's different for everyone. So, how did you arrive at your current political ideology? What kind of formed your analysis of the world today?
Yeah. It's a long story, I guess. The event that I would probably pinpoint as the starting point of my political development was when my dad was a teacher in Wisconsin. And Scott Walker, this Republican Koch-funded governor, Republican, crushed the teachers' unions, basically abolished them or severely weakened them, and gave teachers a $5,000 pay cut and said it was to fix the debt, right, to be fiscally responsible. And then he turned around and gave a 4-point-something trillion dollar subsidy to Foxconn, this foreign company, who came and set up minimal jobs in Wisconsin, not that many. And the Wisconsin debt currently stands at $21 billion, I believe. So Scott Walker's plan to fix the debt was actually just a plan to gouge teachers' salaries and crush their worker representation, which much of the private sector in Wisconsin got on board with, because the private sector had their unions crushed 30 years previous. So they're like, oh, look at these teachers with all these benefits. So they were able to turn sort of the more white-collar working class, or I guess just public working class against the private working class. And it really revealed to me just how the whole system works, right? This the talking point about needing to fix the debt was something my parents kind of fell into. They were a little bit naive at the time. They're like, maybe we do need to fix the debt. Maybe I do need to take this pay cut. And then watching how they turned around and then gave trillions of dollars of our tax money to Foxconn and skyrocketed the debt. I'm like, oh, this system's, totally corrupt. These people like Scott Walker are just pieces of shit. They were funded by corporate America. And then Bernie got involved with the Bernie campaign and eventually became a Marxist-Leninist, like everyone should.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's. I feel like for a lot of people our age, that's kind of how it came about. Was Bernie? I mean, I wasn't really even in tune with politics in this country until Bernie in 2016, and I had a friend that was like, hey, you should check this guy out, and then it kind of all spiraled from there. But I'm curious also, your name, the entity's name, the collective's name, however you characterize it, Midwestern Marks. First of all, if you could talk a little bit about what Midwestern Marks is for, again, anyone who's sleeping under a rock and doesn't know Midwestern Marks, but also the name itself is something that we've been taught that sounds contradictory, as if there could be someone in the Midwest of the United States that considers themselves to be a Marxist. So maybe talk a little bit about why, as like a Midwesterner or people living in the Midwest, like, it makes all the more sense to, ascribe to the ideology of Marx and, understand that Marx's prescriptions for the societal ills that we're all facing is the correct way to move forward in our country.
Yeah, that's a good question. When we founded our project, basically the whole purpose of it was feeling like the left was not targeting the working class in the United States. The Bernie campaign was more targeted at college students and the professional managerial class, and they got workers on board. They did, and they targeted the unions as well. But we feel like that should be the goal of Marxists, in the U.S. to get into working class circles and help them, organize and form organs of worker power, things like stronger unions, and then learn how to use those unions and learn how to engage in class struggle. And we totally saw the modern left as, basically abandoning the working class. So that's why we started our project, and that's why we wanted to name it Midwestern Marx, because that does seem so contradictory, right? People think of the Midwest as just a bunch of Trump supporters, which is not the case. Something like 40% of people don't vote. And Carlos and I, Carlos is the co-founder of Midwestern Marx, we were knocking on doors for Bernie. And, we were finding that people were susceptible to our socialist message. They were susceptible to advocating for their own economic well-being, advocating for class struggle. And honestly, what we both found by the end of the campaign was that our advocating for things from a Marxist perspective was more effective with Midwesterners than advocating from things from a social democratic perspective. Because from a social democratic perspective, you explain 40 to 60,000 people die every year in this country because they don't have health care. This is why we should pay for health care with taxes. Okay, you might get people on board, but you're still appealing to their morality. You're appealing to them, saying you have to care about other people, and in order to give up maybe some more of your taxes, even though Medicare for All would save people money, you're still appealing to people's morality. Versus Marxism, and the appeal to class struggle appeals to people's interests, their class interests based on their position within the economy. If you say we want to form organs of worker power so, the workers can wage a struggle against the company, that really hit with Midwestern people. So that's why we founded Midwestern Marx. And yeah, it's been really interesting seeing the way that, I'd say something like, I didn't even know this was true when we started the project, but now I'd say something like 50% of the online left doesn't even believe in that we can have a revolution in the U.S. They believe it's just not even worth our time because the American people are so reactionary. And I just don't think that don't see anything that could be farther from the truth, and I don't see anything that could be more counterproductive to what we're trying to do, right? People can be organized. People who have to sell their labor power every single day to survive are exploited, for one, and two, they can be organized. So that's the goal of our whole project.
Mm-hmm. You've had a lot of great success in winning over hearts and minds on TikTok of all platforms when it comes to anti-imperialist ideology and Marxist ideology. And for those of our audience who are not on TikTok and aren't familiar with the makeup of the user base of TikTok, it's predominantly young people. So I'm curious because I have my own stories and experiences with trying to introduce people my age, I'm 22, to communism and kind of debunk the propaganda that's been inundated in our country surrounding communism and Marxism since the Red Scare era. I've had my own experiences in trying to win people over and explain to them that it's not what it seems like, it's not what you've been told. How for you in engaging with people your age and engaging with people who are you've been on a series of wrestling teams throughout your life and different schools you've attended. And you're just generally you're just a normal fucking dude. You're not one of these little theory nerds that sits in their basement all day and just doesn't engage with the real world. So how do you, yes, the swoletariats, as Wheezy points out, how do you go about breaking it down for people that might just be average Joes that don't know a lot about politics even and just have kind of heard what, the general American has heard about communism and Marxism?
Yeah. I mean, it's different with the younger generation, which is something I didn't realize till we started TikTok. Like, obviously, when we started Midwestern Marks, the main thrust was our website and then probably our YouTube, and then all of a sudden this TikTok thing just blew up because the younger generation hadn't been through the Red Scare. You know, they hadn't been through that Red Scare propaganda. Now you got people like Vaush who are trying to inundate them with anti-communism and basically do the job of McCarthy for them, or do modern day McCarthyism while calling himself a leftist, him and that whole crowd. But there are a lot of people whose minds were open. A lot of younger people, a lot of Generation Z, and I think we've been able to bring a lot of those people into the fold. Making anti-imperialism a main thrust of what we talk about has been really, really helpful. Because that's, one way you can show how egregious capitalism is and how murderous capitalism is without getting into the nitty-gritty details necessarily, is just talking about the wars and how the wars are for capital expansion. So that's been really effective. But then I also started rereading the Capital series since I was on TikTok. I've read Capital Volume 1 twice now, and I'm on my way through Volume 2 and 3 for the first time, Volume 2 right now. And what I'll do, I'll read a really complex section of Capital, and then I'll get on TikTok and try and summarize it, and people say that nobody cares about theory or theory's useless or whatever. I have videos just explaining what's in Capital Volume 1 in simple terms that have like 20,000 likes and like 100,000 views. It's insane because you're explaining what people experience in the workplace. Yes. Right? It might be in a little bit of complex language, but they get what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it explains like the material conditions of what's going on today. Lumpia Logic, thank you for the super chat. I mean, and it's directly relevant also to everything we've been seeing play out over the course of this past week. I don't know if you've commented on it or if you've engaged in any of the debate around it, but this whole thing surrounding like Netflix workers participating in a walkout, I had commentary on it. I said, it's just crazy to me that these Netflix workers who are walking out for the list of demands that they put forward as a part of the professional managerial class are getting far more attention than like John Deere workers or Kellogg's workers or all the other tens of thousands of workers striking across the country. And it's like those ideas and those the debates that are being had can be expressed and can be understood by way of understanding Marxist theory. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that and this debate of like whether or not Netflix workers have the same collective consciousness and political aims as those of like the real working class that you and I would define?
I would I'd probably lump it into professional managerial class, but you know what? I mean, they sell their labor power to capitalists. So the way we've gone about explaining this, we call it the pressure point theory. So if you look at the economy and imagine a certain industry goes on strike. So imagine all the Netflix workers go on strike and Netflix can't run anymore. How much damage does that do to the overall economy, right? How much does that hurt capitalists? How much does that, how much can that force political change? Probably not that much. People are going to be annoyed if they can't get Netflix. Netflix realistically is just going to hire scabs or whatever to do those jobs. But it's not going to shut down the whole American economy. Now, if the John Deere workers stop production and you can't make tractors anymore, I mean, that shuts down food production. I mean, that is absolutely devastating. Those workers, because of their position in the economy, this isn't a moralistic statement. This isn't even a personal statement about these workers. It's just the fact that that position in the economy has the ability to shut everything down. So if those workers, are organized, they can say, we're going to withhold our labor unless you pass Medicare for all right now. Theoretically, and then the state has to do what they want. And this is why James Connolly, the famous Irish communist, said the power to control, or the battle to control the state, the political sector, is just a reflection of the battle to control industry. Industry meaning, productive industry, where the goods and commodities that we all rely on to survive are produced. Those workers, if organized, have so much power to control the state. And that's what people need to realize, right? It doesn't even have to be a moralistic sentiment against the professional managerial class or Netflix workers, right? Like, they can have their strike. But the reason that the media is covering that more than John Deere is because, John Deere has the ability to shut down the whole economy. They have so much power, and most of the working class doesn't even realize how much power they actually have. So yeah, that's my take on it, I guess.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of what you said, and I would maybe just add that in my view, like I don't even know if you can make the claim that they are producing like a surplus value, because if you look at like the way that Netflix operates, it's a like a rent based corporation, so it's not like they're selling off the labor for a higher surplus value of the Netflix workers. They're engaging in like kind of like an oligopoly that the corporate structure is it's a rentier based corporate structure. But that's neither here nor there, because that's far more nuanced than the commentary we're getting from like the boutique left, the shit libs that are just like, all workers are workers, and that means they're working class, right? I mean, that's like the Vosh level commentary, right? It's just like if they're not the employer, then they're technically working class. But I mean, you've even gotten into I debated Vosh. You've gone back and forth with Vosh a few times. Talk a little bit about what you think about the modern so-called socialists. I mean, they still consider themselves to be socialists. Vosh the other day said that he's like a Fred Hampton style like Marxist or some shit. That they claim to be this, yet in actuality, they don't understand socialism. They don't understand Marxism. They don't reflect the values of these ideologies, and they're fucking imperialists. Like, talk a little bit about that, about your history with people going back and forth like Vosh, and just generally what you think about what they do for the broader left movement.
Yeah, actually, when I first stumbled into Vosh, I didn't mind him because I wasn't super well researched on transgender issues, and I was watching some of Vosh's videos just to try and learn more, which, I don't know. It's probably better to just find actual trans people who do political commentary and listen to them than Vosh. But yeah, then when I actually got into a back and forth with him, and he started saying what he was saying about the DPRK, this was the first back and forth we had, he acted like he was absolutely stunned, like shocked, when I said the U.S. is holding the DPRK in a state of constant warfare. Because the U.S., divided the country in half, installed a dictator in the South, did everything they could to prop up the South, and have held the DPRK under an economic embargo for 70 years since destroying their industry with bombs and killing 20% of their population. So these sanction regimes that the U.S. puts these countries under are devastating, to their especially to the people on the ground, as their countries have less ability to trade for the vital goods that people need. So for Vosh to not even understand what I was he acted like I was crazy. He did that thing where he's like, wait, are you really telling me that the U.S. holds North Korea under a state of constant warfare? I'm like, yes, you dumbass, and anybody who calls themselves a socialist should know that. Holy shit. Yeah. It was like mind-blowing. So then I realized he's just a liberal and an imperialist, and what's really interesting, and I've written about this, if you watch Vosh's video on what his plan to establish socialism is, everyone knows in Marxism, the proletariat is the revolutionary class. The working class collectively has the ability to take political power and change society. Vosh says, here's culture and here's me, and my job is to change the culture so it's more socialist, and then we move in a better direction. It's like he's taken the revolutionary agent, instead of making it the proletariat, he's made it himself. He's like, I am the revolutionary agent. I will convince everybody, to be socialist. And meanwhile, he's spreading imperialist liberal talking points.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolute cancer to the left and something that needs to be fought.
I definitely agree. Changing gears a little bit. What do you think about like leftist parties, communist parties? I talked to Vijay Prashad, and he was basically like, it doesn't really matter what you identify with, what you participate in. It just matters that you are participating in something. And then there's other schools of thought that are like, we need to revive CPUSA. This is something we can do and we should do. And there's the precedent there for CPUSA to be successful. What do you think about like leftist parties, communist parties, labels in general, in an effort to revive Marxism in the United States?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm former DSA when I was with Bernie. But what I tell people when they ask me, I guess, is just join whatever party's the most active in your area. So I guess I agree with VJ. Like, regardless of what the name is, we need people doing the work, right? And what's even more important than that is that people are organizing their workplaces and are getting active in workers' unions and doing that economic and economic organization on top of the community organization. But personally, now I'm CPUSA. Part of the reason is because they're one of the most active parties in my area. They're always hitting me up about doing stuff and organizing things. And I do think it's a good idea to revive the Communist Party in this country. I think it's good to build up a strong base, or and at the time when FDR made all his social democratic reforms in the U.S., there were something like 1 million card-carrying communists. So that was part of what forced his hand into all that. So, I think it'd be a great thing if we had 1 million members in the Communist Party again.
Yeah, I think that'd be great too. And yeah, that's kind of a forgotten history of FDR and the New Deal. I saw Brianna Joy Gray. I think it was her. She tweeted out something today about like FDR bringing about the New Deal, and it's like, well, it was actually kind of like the communists and socialists that forced him to do something, or else all hell was already kind of breaking loose with as a result of the actions of the communists and socialists. But it was gonna get really gnarly had he not done something, and he did do something, but it didn't really meet the needs of what they all wanted. But yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting that like I feel like we have in a lot of countries all across the globe right now, we have like this, definitely in Latin America, a new pink tide. There's socialism, there's communism rising in countries all across the globe in virtually every continent. What do you think though about like Western leftists who try to gatekeep what Marxism and communism is for these other countries? Because a lot of times we do have we do have cultural norms that are far different than in any other country. We're far more like culturally liberal, and for that reason, you get people like Vosh, and you get people like other people within that like sort of bread tube ideology that are like, well, like the Peruvian socialists aren't really socialists or aren't really Marxists because they're a little bit conservative in their social politics. What do you think about people in the U.S., Western leftists and Marxists, who are trying to gatekeep socialism for the rest of the world?
Yeah, it's one of the worst things that exists on the Western left. And it also exists in Latin America. So, like, we talked to Sebastian Leon, who's a Peruvian academic, during Peru's elections recently.
Okay.
And the people in Peru who were saying don't vote for Castillo because he's too socially conservative were like the more Western socialist party based in Lima, Peru, the city, the tourist part that's more Americanized. So it's absolutely like a Western liberal trend. And I guess a good example that I give to people is like Assad in Syria. I wouldn't say like I'm an Assad supporter. Assad says things that I absolutely disagree with, like homosexuality is a product of neoliberalism, right? I don't agree with that. I also don't think that means the U.S. should fund Jaish al-Islam and these extremist groups in Syria and then launch rockets at their country, right? I can still be an anti-imperialist and against intervention and for Syrian development while disagreeing with some of the social politics of Assad, right? Because I don't live in Syria. I live in the U.S. If I can advocate for the things I want here in the country I'm in. And as far as other countries, I think they have a right to develop themselves however they want. And there's a lot of it. I can think of a few more examples, but yeah, that one's probably good.
Yeah, no, it's like leftists in America cannot seem to understand that's like just because you are defending the sovereignty of another country, it doesn't mean that you're like a de facto supporter of that government or of that given leader, democratically elected leader, or anything like that. Which, I think just it ties into the American exceptionalist ideology that so many leftists hold here. Going into like the whole debate about patriotism, though, this was like highly contentious on the left for some reason. I still don't understand why, but What were your initial thoughts when this all kind of sprung about? Because patriotism and communism have historically, in just about every country that it's, there's been like large movements, they've been tied together. Like they've been one and the same. It's not like these are like ideas that are just being kind of pushed together by American communists right now. Like there's a ton of precedent for socialist patriotism all across the world. So were you surprised when this debate started happening and people were like freaking out on the internet and they're like, "Oh my God, you're a fucking if you were calling yourself a patriot, you're supporting the imperialist state and you're supporting like the settler state." Were you surprised by it? And maybe if you could just give your stance on like what you think about patriotism as it relates to socialist movements.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised, kind of not, because I think a lot of Twitter fights devolve into like two sides just straw manning each other. So like when we say patriotism, all we're saying is that the class struggle is going to take a national form. And like and also like if you go around to the vast majority of Americans saying F America, you're all settlers, like they're probably not going to join your movement. Like, you need to go to people who are exploited and offer them a path of construction, right? It seems like a lot of times the left is just a death cult because we live in America. It's like, let's just mope all the time because our country's so bad. It's like, well, what the hell are we going to do to change it then? If it's so bad, let's go organize some workers and overthrow the damn government. But then they're like, nope, you can't do that. The workers are too reactionary. It's like, well, who's going to teach them not to be reactionary then, right? If the left shuns them and pushes them away, they're going to go be with other reactionaries. So the whole point of leftism is that people can change, right? In dialectical philosophy, that people change and they develop, they can grow out of these crappy views. And not that those are views that even, the entirety of the US has. And what I think a lot of people equated patriotism with is just supporting imperialism, right? It is like, if you're calling yourself an American patriot, like I saw someone the other day saying calling yourself a socialist or American patriot is like supporting that the U.S. has student lunch debt, right, for children, or it's supporting U.S. imperialism, or it just means waving the flag. It's like, no, all we're saying is that the class struggle is going to take a national form because that is how Marxism, that's Marxism. And I was reading the other day, actually, I was rereading Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, and Engels says capital is now spreading to America, which is creating the antithesis to capital, the proletariat, which will eventually overthrow it. And now people are talking about how Marx and Engels wouldn't have been in favor of the American working class overthrowing capital. They were explicitly in favor of it. Marx was writing letters to Lincoln about how he could win the Civil War because it would advance the mode of production. It would get rid of slavery. So, yeah, I don't know. Like, I watched Esha's debate with Haas about it, and I really like Esha. She's a great friend, but I just couldn't, she was just like, so she was just saying, like, patriotism equals supporting imperialism, and Haas is like, no, we want the class struggle to take a national form, and, but, they couldn't get past that, right? So it seems like people aren't even engaging with the argument anymore, and I do think it's an important argument to have, right? It's worth having, but people can't have an argument or a disagreement anymore without, you're canceled, you're on that part of the left that I don't like, we lost like some followers from it or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, why can't we disagree and have these important discussions? That's what is the worst part of it for me, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like, if you disagree on one thing, then you're instantly canceled. I don't know, like, bringing up Brianna Joy Gray again, I don't think she identifies as like a Marxist or anything, but she definitely identifies as a leftist, and she brought on Dr. Gerald Horne to talk about patriotism and leftist politics and whether or not these two things can be together. And he basically was like, I don't call myself a patriot. You're not going to see me like wrapping myself in the American flag, but will I work with people who do to achieve a common goal? Of course I would. Like, I have no problem with that. And that's honestly, like, at the end of the day, I think that is the ideology that should be had by people who don't consider themselves to be patriots for whatever reason, don't want to associate with patriots, or don't want to, associated as a group that identifies as patriots, but like they can work with other people who are. But at the end of the day, I would still argue that if they're working with us on common goals that we have, they're going to be doing things that are inherently patriotic, right? But I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Else to add there?
What?
Did you have
sorry.
Did you have something else to add there?
Just one thing. Yeah, I remember I went for a run during the Patriot thing, so I was getting mad looking at Twitter, so I just like went on like a super long 10-mile run, and like 90% of the houses I ran by had American flags, and it's like yeah, we have to work with these people, even if you hate the American flag, whatever. Like, if you say anyone who flies an American flag is evil, and therefore, like, we live in America, of course people are going to do that. Every proletariat throughout the history of humankind has had national sentiments, or feelings of patriotism. So it's like, you have to work with that, even if you disagree with it, otherwise we're screwed.
Yeah, and I mean, like, even the Declaration of Independence, I mean, this is something I feel like a lot of people don't maybe remember, I don't know, but like the Declaration of Independence even says like it separates the government and the people as two separate entities, and it says it's the government's duty to guarantee life, liberty, pursuit of happiness to the people, and if it's not doing that, it's up to the people to alter or entirely abolish the government, so it's like, even if you support something like that, you are probably doing it through a patriotic lens of guaranteeing those fundamental rights to all Americans. So I don't know. It's just like it seems like a lot of people are kind of coping and don't want to call themselves a patriot because they've been brainwashed into this ideology of like America bad, burn it all down. But it doesn't really align with their political values, and it's not going to be successful at the end of the day. So
it's like you have the people who are like not anti-imperialist enough, like Vosh, they're just imperialists, and then it's like you have the people who take anti-imperialism so far that they're like, nope, America needs to be destroyed. We can have no revolution here. Yeah. It's like, that's not anti-imperialism. That's going to lead to nothing. That's going to allow the empire to continue. We need to get the working class organized here if we want to stop imperialism.
Yeah. No, I mean, I saw Haas of Infrared was debating someone the other day. I think like a Palestinian dude or something, and he was like, your patriotism that you claim to ascribe to, it hurts my people. It causes bombs to be dropped on my people, and he was just basically like, no, like my patriotism is what says that that's not what our country's about, and we want to stop that, but. I don't know. I feel like the debate honestly could just go around in circles forever because people are choosing not to recognize what we're saying in our arguments, and the fact that we don't believe in the imperialism or the corporatism or any of that stuff. But I don't know. But speaking of like cancelable offenses, one of the most cancelable offenses that a Marxist could engage in today's like political discourse, at least up till recently, is saying that there is not a genocide happening in Xinjiang, China. That's been like one of the no-nos, right? Is like, if you say there's not a genocide happening in Xinjiang, China, then like cancel, delete your YouTube channel, delete your Twitch channel, you're done, delete your Twitter. But honestly, I think it's very clear that those who have been on the side of evidence-based argument when it comes to these claims of genocide in China, and those, of course, the evidence leaning to the arguments that like there is no genocide, there's no cultural genocide, there's a terrorism issue with a non-indigenous ideology, Salafi jihadism, that was brought to the region by the United States and Saudi Arabia. And China decided that they were going to invest in economic opportunities and re-education to eradicate that terrorism issue. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this whole propaganda effort, why you think it was initiated, how successful you think it's been, and whether or not you agree with like my interpretation of it as kind of failing right now. Like as of like the past few weeks, I feel like people more and more are starting to see through the bullshit.
Yeah, I know it's happening because I've been talking about this since I got on online, doing the online political thing, like, and on TikTok too, where people aren't as politically, like on Twitter, it's a lot of Marxist-Leninists and people who kind of know what's up. And versus TikTok, not really. I kind of snuck my way in without explaining how much of a tanky I was at first. And then I saw people who consider themselves socialists supporting this Xinjiang thing. And I'm like, uh-oh, I got to say something about this. So for a year and a half, I'm saying there's no genocide going on. It says, you piece of shit, genocide defender, worse, nonstop. Anytime I talked about it, no matter how nice I tried to portray it, but yeah, it's now it's different. Things are different now, especially since AP released that article saying China loosens its grip on Uyghur Muslims. Like, oh yeah, they just decided to discontinue the genocide. And another thing that's really helped is Daniel Dumbrill, who's this China-based person who's went to Xinjiang. He's like, when you look for a genocide in Xinjiang, you feel like an idiot because there's just clearly that's not what's going on. And then so the most interesting conversation I had about it was with my favorite professor from college, the one who kind of got me into politics and Marxism more heavily. He has his PhD in Chinese politics, and he's studied and been to China many, many times. So, of course, I'm like, what's going on in Xinjiang? He's like, yeah, it's they're cracking down on these terrorist efforts. It's fair to maybe say that they've turned it into a bit of a surveillance state, like they've increased surveillance and police presence. But they've also had these horrific terrorist attacks by, as you said, the ETIM, this U.S.-funded and backed group who the U.S. recently took off the terrorist listing, allowing them to recruit and fund. And I didn't even realize it at the time because Xinjiang was such like a hot button issue. But he goes, this is the strategy of the U.S. every time they do regime change. They fund a right-wing group in the area. They tell you that the country is committing human rights abuses, and then they sanction the crap out of it and try and destabilize the region. It's like that's exactly what they did to Afghanistan when they were funding Osama bin Laden and the Mujahideen, who then turned around and gave funding to the ETIM, who are the ones responsible for a lot of these terrorist attacks in China. Terrorist attacks that have been horrible. The Urumqi riots killed over 140 people. So it's just classic U.S. Funding the right wing group, lying about a country. But people are the Western left is anti-imperialist in hindsight. They're anti-imperialist 20 years after the wars happened, right? Every leftist is anti-Iraq. Every leftist knows they lied about weapons of mass destruction. But those same leftists are the ones going, what about Xinjiang? We got to do something about China. It's like, do you not realize the same exact thing is happening? You're just in the middle of all the lies. But when you have people like Hassan Piker, he cares more about his audience and his Twitch followers than he does about telling the truth. So, if it's popular to say F Taiwan, F China, there's a genocide going on, he's going to say it. And he's still going to call himself an anti-imperialist and not feel bad about it. So, yeah, people who are content creators, I hold to a higher standard. Like, if you get tricked by the propaganda, whatever, learn from it and come to the right side. But if you're a content creator, calling yourself a leftist and helping the U.S. spread propaganda, that shit is inexcusable, if you ask me.
Yeah, bro. I mean, like, not only is he, like, regurgitating the State Department propaganda, but, like, to a disgusting degree. Like, he said, I don't know if you saw, he did, like, a video talking about it when the Associated Press article came out. So the Associated Press article comes out, it's basically like, yeah, there's no fucking genocide, you fucking idiots. And then he comes out and he's like, yeah, well, there's still cultural genocide happening, and it's actually worse than the Canadian residential schools. And I'm just like, you mean the residential schools that were responsible for thousands and thousands and thousands of deaths? Like that shit? And you're saying that it's worse than that? And there's not even a cultural, like, I don't know. It's crazy. But, like, and it is, you bring up, it's similar to, like, what's happening in Syria as well. Like, you have all of these shit-lib imperialists that are like, no, actually, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and Jaish al-Islam are good, and we should be supporting them. And they're actually just like freedom fighters. Then they're moderate rebels. And it's like, how do you not understand that, like, you're defending the same ideology, which is backed by the same nefarious actors who are trying to do the same thing they've done for decades and decades and decades? I don't know. I've never understood it. But, like, that is what's happening.
Yeah.
Maybe people will recognize, but it's gonna, as you said, it's gonna take a while.
Yeah, I think people are really susceptible to the way that the empire preys on your compassion, and they try and moralize everything. So it's like, oh, I'm against war in Syria. It's like, oh, well, you know exactly what Vosh did to you when you debated him about the OPCW. You're like, oh, here's the facts from the UN whistleblowers, and he's like, oh, Assad defender, Assad supporter, you support chemical
Yeah.
gas attacks on the Syrian people. You know, they try and make you seem like the biggest immoral piece of shit imaginable, which is exactly what they've done to all of us about Xinjiang, what they're going to do to all of us about Taiwan, and all these things. And people fall for that because they're, you know, people like Hassan are weak, they're individualistic, and they're liberals, and they care more about their following than they do about the actual movement. They're not dedicated to class struggle and actually building a Marxist movement in this country. So, you know, they become unprincipled, which is the key to being a Marxist is, you know, staying true to your principles even when it's tough. So, you know.
Yeah, and it that definitely is like what the empire does is they prey on they prey on a lot of like liberal values to carry out their deeds. Like that's what Max Blumenthal exposed happening in Cuba. They went to the U.S. empire, the intelligence community. They went to like the Afro-Cuban majority areas within the country, and they tapped into the I'll read that in a second. Thank you. They tapped into like the hip hop culture, and they utilized that like predominantly black Afro-Cuban hip hop culture to communicate their imperialist ideology. So I mean, it really is wild. But yeah, I don't know. I'm curious. Also, I asked this question to Caleb Maupin. He had a very interesting response. He basically said that. Well, I'll tell you the question first. The question is, what message do you have for young communists in America? And we're both pretty young, so I'm thinking like younger than us, high schoolers, young high school communists. What message do you have for them? I'll let you give your answer first, actually.
Yeah, I'd say read, stay off Twitter, join a party, and organize your workplace, or join a workplace that's already got a union and learn how the union works and get involved. Those are the main things you can do. You know, organizing your community with the party, organizing your workplace through, you know, workplace organization and unions, and then do not get caught up in the online, you know, leftist community. Find, you know, you can find good people. Like, obviously, I spend a lot of time on the online left, but there's so much shaming and so much circular infighting that matters to nobody outside of Twitter. It can be a trap. It can be a trap for all of your mental energy that could be spent, you know, studying something actually important. So yeah, those would be my 4 points of advice.
That's good advice. I think that's good. I think.
Oh wait, someone said don't get any tattoos. Can I show something quick? I got a sticker poke the other day. Well, this is. Can people see it?
Yo, that's dope. It looks
Yep.
good. Get the
Thanks, my
tattoos,
girlfriend
people.
did.
Get the tattoos. Don't dye your hair. Yeah, that's another good one. No, the tattoos are all right. Tattoos are all right. No, that's good advice. Caleb Maupin's was pretty similar. Pretty similar.
Nice.
I do want to read this super chat from Yafan Zhang, who said, "My friend's dad, who's a doctor, got beheaded in the hospital during the Urumqi terrorist riot in 2009. They carried his head and paraded the streets afterwards. I wonder what the U.S. would have reacted. Holy shit, that's so fucking gnarly. Jesus Christ." I don't even know what to say to that, but yeah, I mean, the U.S. does not care. You know what? This is what I'm gonna say to that. The U.S. does not care about its own people. If it did, it would not spend 7 point however many trillion dollars over 10 years on military expenditures, and instead, neglect the needs at home, right? The fundamental needs at home. So how can we expect them to care about anyone else beyond our borders if they don't care about, the most oppressed in our own country? At the end of the day, we can't, and they don't. So sorry to hear that. And yeah, I don't think the U.S. would have cared unless they can exploit it to further their own imperialist ambitions. I don't think they would have cared.
Yeah, I mean, that was U.S. funded groups who did, carried out the Urumqi riots.
In China.
Yeah, in Xinjiang, it was groups who indirectly got funding from the Mujahideen, who were funded and backed by the CIA and U.S.
Yeah, I mean they were trained by them. Lots of them were trained in Pakistan, and they brought that ideology home afterwards, back to Xinjiang, and they carried out over 1,000 terrorist attacks between 1999 and 2016. So for anyone who thinks like, oh, like, well, we have terrorism in America, but we don't do that to our people. We don't do surveillance to, I mean, we do, but we don't do like that high level of surveillance. If you want to think of that as a high level of surveillance higher than what we do here, we don't do re-education. The terrorism issue in Xinjiang, was not indigenous to Xinjiang. It's not like a white nationalist sort of terrorism that is sprouted on its own in the United States. It was non-indigenous. It was forced upon their people, and also it was so widespread. You guys, you wouldn't even like that story right there is not an isolated event. There were many events like that. So it is far different, and I think that's something that like a lot of people might just not understand. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think people understand the scale of the terrorist attacks, and they should check out Chow Collective's kind of write-up that they did about it. Yeah, and people, they don't know the U.S. funding of this and the history of the U.S. funding things like this. And France has the same sort of terrorism, or de-radicalization programs as China. But for some reason, the U.S. isn't trying to destroy France. It's almost like France is an ally in a NATO member country. But I'm sure that couldn't be it.
I wonder what that reason could be. Who knows? Invalid, thank you for resubscribing. I appreciate that. Eddie, I don't want to end this conversation before we talk about Venezuela, because you did your, correct me if I'm wrong, your senior thesis on Venezuela.
Yep.
What specifically, first of all, was that on?
It was on the U.S. media portrayal and the sanctions and Venezuela's economic and political development.
Okay. So given that was your senior thesis, you focused a lot of time, energy, resources to studying this and explaining what was happening there. First of all, I'd like to hear your thoughts on everything that's happening with Alex Saab, and what the motives of the United States in extraditing Alex Saab has been. What are they trying to do in trying to stop Alex Saab from doing what he's doing in Venezuela?
I haven't even seen that, actually.
Really?
Yeah. What happened? Can you explain it to me? Because now I'm super interested.
No, you got to check this out. So, well, okay. First of all, Anya Parmpil. I don't know if you follow her on Twitter, but she's done. I know you said to stay off Twitter, but she's a good follow on Twitter. She's based. She's been covering a lot of this, and she's one of the people I look to for a lot of my Venezuela coverage. She was the first person I saw interview Elena Duhan, who's the special rapporteur on sanctions for the UN. But anyways, she discussed the fact that Alex Saab, who was leading the CLAP program, which maybe you could talk about it, he was leading that shit and basically helping Venezuela circumvent sanctions. He was on some trip in Cape Verde, or Verde, however you say it, and he got fucking arrested there at the behest of the U.S., and they extradited him to Florida, and now he's in a prison in Florida.
Whoa.
And he was also the guy, I guess, who, like, I don't know the details of it super well, but I guess he was the guy who would, like, do a lot of the international trade deals with, like, other, like, axes of resistance countries to secure, like, raw goods and resources for Venezuela and, like, establish trade deals. So, like, he was kind of, like, one of the main guys who was, like, circumventing the sanctions, and they just arrested him. It's fucking wild.
That's insane. Yeah, I can respond to that. The two things that strike me, one is a lot of the skilled workers have left Venezuela because of the sanctions. It's one of the top countries where people have fled from. So the people who are skilled in running their industries and running their food production and steel production and things that they need, a lot of them have left. And as have a lot of like economists and other people who understand international finance and understand exactly how the U.S. carries out these sanction campaigns and how to get around them. So that makes perfect sense that that's the type of person that the U.S. would target. And what's so fucking ironic about it is in my thesis, I talk about Leopoldo Lopez. is it him or is it another guy? There's a handful of guys that they've accused Maduro of arresting on political grounds, and one of them stole a government helicopter, took it to Caracas, Venezuela, and was firing grenade launchers at Maduro and trying to kill him. So then they didn't arrest him. They let this fucking guy go, even though the Venezuelan government should have arrested his ass. And then he tried to stage a coup. So like they went to arrest him and he fled the country. And then the U.S. is portraying Maduro as a dictator for trying to arrest that guy. Like you can imagine if someone took a military helicopter and went to kill Joe Biden with a grenade launcher, how fast they would be dead or in jail. But, you know, Maduro's a dictator for arresting people like that. But the U.S. is capturing Venezuelan politicians in you know, different parts of the world and bringing them to Miami to be imprisoned. Like, you know, but we're not the dictatorship. It is insane. And yeah, one thing I always say about Venezuela, when you actually look into the nitty gritty of what's going on, it really shows you how grand the scale of the lies are of the U.S. empire, you know, like stuff like that, and how incredible the absolute hypocrisy is and how full of shit these people are. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, like, what were some of, like, the major findings that you put forward in your thesis surrounding, like, the propaganda that was brought onto the Western world, really, surrounding Venezuela?
It is insane. Like every year, other than like this recent year when the opposition party didn't even participate in the election, every year, including 2015, when the right-wing party actually won National Assembly election, the U.S. comes out and just says the elections are fraudulent. They say the OAS told us so, which is you know, U.S. regime change arm in Latin America. And you know, not only are Latin America's elections the most monitored anywhere else in the world, there's something like 140 international observers who go there. Jimmy Carter went there and he said that. He said Venezuela's elections are the most highly monitored of anywhere in the entire world. A former U.S. president who also, you know, has said similar things about North Korea since, you know, ending his presidency. But, you know, if you search Venezuelan elections, all you'll see is like how they were fraudulent from outlets like Vox, you know, which are well respected. So that was an interesting finding. And then I think another thing that people don't understand is that Venezuela wasn't made dependent on oil by Hugo Chavez. That was the country that Hugo Chavez inherited. So Venezuela in the 70s developed this thing called Dutch disease, where one of your industries gets so big that all the other industries lag behind. And it was because British Dutch Shell and Rockefeller Standard Oil were just extracting their oil for the enrichment of Western multinationals, you know, neocolonialism. So when Hugo Chavez renationalized PDVSA, the Venezuelan oil company, and started using that company to fund all these social programs, people were like, oh, you know, they're too dependent on oil. Socialism didn't diversify the country. It's like, no, socialism is trying to diversify the country, you know, while they're under a sanction campaign from the U.S. What made the country so dependent on oil was capitalism and more specifically imperialism.
No, you bring up good points there. I wasn't aware of that story with the helicopter thing either. That's fucking wild. But like that is a very, very common like thing that we see from the US in the Western world. Like what we just saw happen in Cambodia, I believe it was. I think it was. I covered it on stream because like the squad decided to place sanctions on Cambodia and Myanmar over the past like month or so, and I was like, what the fuck? Like, why are they going after Cambodia? And then I looked at it, and they're like citation, and also the EU has given like non-preferential trade deals to Cambodia now, and I was like, what is going on there? Well, it turns out that Cambodia dismantled like 2 U.S. funded like military bases within Cambodia, and they also banned an opposition party from participating in their upcoming elections, and they basically said they were going to arrest the leader of the opposition party if he came back. And it's like, well, that sounds bad. That sounds really bad, like just at surface level. But then you look into the things that this guy has been doing, the leader of the opposition group. He's been going to the U.S. every year for like the past like 2 decades. He's been planning and plotting and scheming with the State Department neocons. And he's literally publicly said that he wants to take like the Serbian approach or the Yugoslavic approach to the current leadership in Cambodia, which is an NED-funded coup. So it's like you can't blame a given country for wanting to arrest the opposition that's trying to illegally coup the country in a treasonous manner. But like all Westerners see is this bullshit that sounds bad on the surface. So
right, and you think about how liberal media melted down about the Capitol riots. A handful of dumb Trump supporters went to the Capitol, including, by the way, the Falun Gong and Iranian monarchists and Cuban Gusanos, and all these groups showed up at the Capitol riots, who the CIA has been propping up for years because they were helping the U.S. carry out their interests in other countries. But, liberal media melted down about the Capitol riots. Like, this was a coup on our country. How could Trump carry out this coup? It's like, do you know how many coups the U.S. has carried out? And, like, of course, they were calling for, like, these people who stormed the Capitol to be arrested. And it's like, but when you have people, shooting grenade launchers or working with the U.S. to plot coups in other countries, we call, their leaders dictators when they try and arrest those people. Yep. It's like, what? The hypocrisy is so bold-faced.
Yeah, no. John Hand, thank you for becoming a member. So, Eddie, last question here. I don't want to keep it too long, but last question here. The upcoming extradition trial of Julian Assange is about to take place. I don't know the exact date. I think it might start tomorrow, actually, but it's coming up. And the Biden administration, just like how they've continued the Trump policy of sanctions on Venezuela and, recognizing Juan Guaido as the de facto leader of the country, even though the entire EU was like, we're not going to recognize Juan Guaido as the president anymore. We're going to recognize Maduro as the president. Biden is also continuing another Trump policy of pursuing the extradition of Julian Assange. So if you have any words on Julian Assange and the illegal extradition effort, maybe you could speak about that for our audience, and I'm sure everyone's well aware of the plight of Julian Assange, but if you could give your take on it, that'd be incredible.
Sure. I think it makes so blatant the hypocrisy of all these other countries that the U.S. calls dictatorships, that the fact that somebody whose crime was releasing horrific U.S. war crimes to the public, and release to the public what their tax dollars were going to fund, which is, mass murder and killing of civilians, gunning down of civilians with helicopters, paid for by the tax dollars of working people in the U.S. And because he revealed those facts to the people of the U.S., he's facing life in prison, or he's facing the full force of the American empire. They're trying to prosecute him, as they have done with every single whistleblower. And then they're looking at Venezuela and talking about how they have a muzzled media and how they need to be overthrown, and Cuba and all these other countries around the world. And it's like, we are actively, not only do we have the largest prison population on earth, but we throw journalists in prison, or the government does everything they can to throw journalists in prison when they expose U.S. war crimes. So if I've ever heard of a dictatorship in my life, it is that. It is the country that massacres people with helicopters paid for by the tax dollars of their working people, and then when people expose those crimes, they throw them in prison. That is a dictatorship of capital.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Eddie, thank you so much for joining the stream. We're going to continue on here and react to some new infrared content, but thank you for joining. I think everyone really appreciated you coming on the show. You're always welcome back, and keep up the great work. Again, for everyone who wants to check out Midwestern Marks, I have linked their YouTube channel in the pinned comment in the live chat, and I'm also going to spam their website in the YouTube chat and on Twitch right now. Be sure to go check out all their work. Any last words for the audience here and where people can find you, all that stuff?
Sure. Midwestern Marks on everything except TikTok. It's Eddie Liger Smith on TikTok. And yeah, thank you for doing this. Thank you for what you're doing. People, I don't know. I think what we're doing here is really good. I think we are popularizing socialism amongst young people more than people even realize. Not just you and me, but everyone collectively who does want to see a path of construction, who wants to construct something rather than just this sort of online death cult that a lot of the left can tend to be. So when I see people like you, it gives me a lot of hope, and it makes me feel like I'm not alone out here trying to spread socialism in the U.S. So thank you for what you do, and thank you so much for having me on.
Likewise, brother. Keep up the good work, and we'll stay in touch.
For sure. Thanks, comrade.
All right. Peace.